Hello, going to make a little review of Congress for you today. So this is not meant to be an exhaustive review. It's meant to point out some things that I feel are important, things you want to highlight as you prepare for the exam. I'm going to break it up into one branch of government at a time, make it a little bit more manageable. So today, the things that we're going to be rolling over, we're going to look a little bit at a couple pages of Unit 2 notes and our two PowerPoints, one on Congress and one on lawmaking. So I'm going to give you just a minute to grab your materials, and I'm going to get some pump up theme music, and away we go. I think it's time to blow this. Get everybody with the stuff together. Okay, 3, 2, let's try. Okay, we can only do so much theme music, then we gotta get on with life. So you're looking right now at your Unit 2 notes, the start of it. Just take a minute and look at the bulleted items. It says right there, after we study Congress, you should know these things. So it's a good place to start to just look over those items and see if you know them. Maybe highlight the things that you don't know. Also we have vocab there. Always a good thing to run through the vocab. Okay. Then as we move on down to the notes here, let me get your screen down that far. There we go, chapter 11. Okay, a couple of vocab terms there, a delegate and a trustee. I think I made a point of emphasis that members of Congress have two areas of focus. One is their local constituency, and constituency just means the people that you represent. So we've got our local constituency or our state constituency and a national constituency. Always a good thing to keep in mind. Right there, we have a list of items on what influences members of Congress as they're going to vote on legislation. Keep in mind, legislation just means a bill. It's a proposed law. So 7 items there. That screams multiple choice question, but I did emphasize a couple things. Political parties, the number one thing you want to look for if you want to predict how a member of Congress will vote. Okay. Also a term log rolling there, which is vote trading between members of Congress. And I believe I highlighted interest groups because they're in charge of the money for much of the campaigns, which we'll get into when we talk about that in elections. All right, term pork barrel spending. Pork barrel spending, again, unnecessary spending additions added on to bills that they tried to get rid of. Technically, going to go air quotes here, technically they are illegal. Congress outlawed them in 2010. However, they don't really police it all that well. These items still pop up in bills. We saw it huge in the stimulus package. We saw it a few years ago when they had Hurricane Sandy funding. And who wants to vote against those things? Well, we stick those little items in there. So if you vote against the whole bill, we say that you're trying to hurt the stimulus bill instead of saying, why are we giving $10 million for gender studies in Pakistan? All right, that type of thing. One way in which members of Congress have kind of gotten around this is we pass large bills, sometimes called omnibus bills, and then once all the bills have been passed with a lot of money, that goes off to the executive branch. Well, then the executive branch can kind of split up the money a little bit. So instead of people going to Congress to beg for those amendments onto their bills, they go to the executive agencies and they just beg for their money there. Okay, so that's all I want to highlight notes-wise from that particular part of your Canvas stuff. Now I'm going to go into PowerPoint numero uno. Again, this is not meant to be a total exhaustive look at every single slide we have. I just want to accent some things that I think are important. This is very, very important. As it says right here, muy importante. It's important to realize that there are differences between the House and the Senate. Those differences are intentional, and in many cases, they are constitutional. Okay, so if we're building this in intentionally and constitutionally in many ways, obviously we want the Senate to be more prestigious. When they first drew up the Constitution, the people did not choose the senators. State legislatures chose senators. We only changed that later on with the 17th Amendment. So the people never meant for the House to be as important as the Senate. But we need the House because that's the most direct representation of popular sovereignty. So if you take a look at it there, we have differences in membership, in terms, in age, in citizenship, etc. All of those are designed to give the Senate more power and more prestige. Then we have the concern that maybe some states are getting rolled over compared to other states. So the same number of senators, and we have the good senators from Wyoming having just as much representation power as the good senators from California, even though California's got 50 times the number of Wyomingans. All right. Current Congress makeup is not a bad thing to look at. It's 221 to 211. Update hot off the presses. It's now 221 to 212 thanks to a resolved election in New York State over the weekend. Senate is 50-50 with the tying vote being Kamala Harris, President of the Senate, also Vice President of the United States. Okay. In terms of race and gender, you don't need to memorize all of these exact numbers. I would look at the fact that we have a record number of women, a record number of African Americans, a record number of Hispanics. And I would know them in order. For example, there's more African Americans serving than Hispanics, even though in America there are more Hispanics than African Americans. Don't worry about previous jobs. It's just fun. Reapportionment and redistricting, those two terms, reapportionment comes first because we have to know how many districts we have before we can split them up. The drawing, backtrack just a sec, the drawing of districts is done at the state level, okay? And that brings up the potential for gerrymandering. So each state is going to draw up their own districts. Whichever party's in charge in that state can potentially draw those districts to their advantage. We call that gerrymandering. What a fun term. You can't draw these deliberately to advantage one race or ethnic group. We've seen that in Shaw versus Reno. There are your Iowa members of Congress. You should know who your rep is. You should know who your senators are. You should know how the split is party-wise. Okay, so we have currently 5 Republicans, 1 Democrat in Iowa's congressional delegation. 4 reps, 2 senators. All right, the Constitution. What does the Constitution give Congress? Well, it gives Congress a bicameral House, both the House and the Senate. We know that. And we should be familiar with the powers of Congress. And again, I break these up into 3 categories: money powers, military powers, and then just some miscellaneous powers thrown in like post offices and immigration, etc. Don't forget your necessary and proper clause. We had that in McCulloch v. Maryland. That is going to greatly, greatly advance the power of the federal government. As stellar as this story was, there's no need to memorize the story about Mr. Goldsmith going to Washington, D.C. Trust me, I'll never forget it. It's buried in my heart. Okay, let's compare the House and the Senate. Basically, the House is going to move things through more quickly. The mechanisms by which they do so are called unanimous consent in the Committee of the Whole. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, in charge of the House. Majority Party, third in line for the presidency. Majority and minority leaders, we have these in both the House and Senate, just tells us which political party is in charge. We have the whips, who are the vote counters between the leadership at the top and the rank and file beneath them. And then the party caucus, where we get all the party together and we decide who is going to be on what particular committee. Senate, run by the majority leader, the ultimate president of the Senate. The vote breaker, like I already said, is the vice president. And the president pro tempore, fourth in line to the presidency, and currently appearing in 5 Batman movies. Be familiar with advice and consent. Please do. Advice and consent is important because it is language that can be interpreted in 2 different ways. These apply to people that the president has nominated, but the Senate must confirm. So President Biden will nominate people, the Senate must confirm them. And the debate goes, is it the Senate's job to more advise the president or to require the senator's consent for the president's nominee? Traditionally, Democrats have gone more with you need my consent, and Republicans more with I'm just here to advise. Okay, and that shifted roughly 30, 40 years ago, especially when Supreme Court nominations started to get very contentious. The committees, standing committees, the permanent ones, select committees, temporary, investigative committees, and joint committees, still permanent, but of a lesser quality, standing, status, not as important as standing committees. Okay, this is probably one multiple choice question. Basically, you take the standing committees and you divide them by their role. What do? Do they make up rules? Do they dole out money? Do they pass laws in a sense, etc.? The seniority rule still applies. The more time you spent in Congress, the more important you are, but it's not as strict as it was years ago, so it doesn't apply as much. One function of committees I might point out is oversight, and that's going to come up in several different units of study. Oversight always refers to Congress overseeing the president. Okay, so the legislative branch always overseeing the executive branch. And again, whenever you have divided government, you have extreme oversight. When you do not have divided government, you tend to have an absence of oversight. And of course, sometimes Elmo testifies in Congress. Why? Because it's funny. Whatever. All right, that's a wrap on that one. Let me go and find lawmaking. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. Wah, 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 wah. All right, we're going to take a quick break, give you just a minute to catch your thoughts, and I'm going to get a drink of water here. Okay, let's make a law. Even though 90% of all bills die in committee, let's make a law. Let's start off right here. You're going to be asked to critique the process. So you need to know the lawmaking process, but I also want you to critique it. How do I want you to critique it? I tell you right here. I want you to point out the strength or lack of strength of the majority and minority parties. I want you to point out the power of the presidency. And I want you to look at divided government and if that has a positive or negative impact on lawmaking. So when I ask you to critique it, I might just give you one aspect of that. I might say, critique the lawmaking process by pointing out the strength of divided government or the consequences of divided government or lack of it, or the strength of the majority party, etc. So that's the lens through which I want you to approach lawmaking, or the lenses. Okay, again, I'm not going to go through everything here. I'm going to point out, highlight a few things. You need to know the process. Here's where bills come from. A sunset provision, that could be a multiple choice question. It might not be. There's your overview, kind of like your rough draft of how we go through the process. And then what do I point out here? So we're starting our bill. You can start it in the House or the Senate or both simultaneously. Always note the Ways and Means Committee. That's where all tax bills start, and that's in the House of Representatives. An omnibus bill is always a good thing to keep in mind because that happens every single year. Large spending bill with just a wide variety of items. All right, so we're going to bury your bill, and then we're going to try to bring your bill out of committee. 90% of all bills are going to die, so we have to know what's it take to get through. I think we covered this in class, but more than anything else, what it takes for your bill to survive is the undying love of the majority party. You can have the greatest bill in the world, and if it's an idea of the minority party, it's probably not going anywhere. All right, legislative record, not a bad vocab term to know. It's just basically a review of everything that's happened to your bill along every step of the way. Committees, subcommittees. You don't need to memorize all the different subcommittees. Entertaining as that would be, don't worry about that. There are more in the House than there are in the Senate. All right, committee options, that's an important one right there. I would put a star by that. So when your bill gets to a committee or a subcommittee, what's going to happen? They can just take a simple vote on it. They can add amendments and change the content of it. They can put it at the bottom and kill it. We call that pigeonholing. Pigeonholing, when you take it, put it at the bottom of the list. Or they can have hearings to find out more about it, which is usually a good sign for your bill. Keep this in mind. Every committee is favored by the majority party. Okay? Every committee is chaired by the majority party. So they're going to decide what bills we're going to look at, and they're also ultimately going to decide whether or not this bill advances. So extreme power by the majority party in committees, but then again, they are the majority party, and math is a thing. All right, we can move on from that. If your bill moves on, we call that a markup. It can be marked up from subcommittee to committee or committee to the floor. And make sure you highlight the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee, again, only in the House of Representatives. So the Rules Committee, which sometimes is called the traffic cop, what they do is they decide whether or not we're going to have amendments on that bill. If we can allow that, that's a huge, huge power. And it decides how long we are going to debate these issues, debate these bills. So it can limit debate on those as well. Your discharge petition ain't gonna work because the majority party is needed to pass a discharge petition, and they're the ones burying the bill in the first place. All right, we kind of went over pork barrel spending as well, called earmarks, etc. Again, difference between the House and the Senate. The House is going to be limited. We're going to move things through quickly. There's the ways in which we do it. The Senate literally can just slow down. They can speak. It's supposed to be like that. Again, the House, boom, the will of the people, get it through. The Senate, let's stop and think about this. Is this a really good idea? Don't you have some friends like that? Some of your friends are like, hey, we're doing this now. They belong in the House of Representatives. And some of your friends say, is this really a good idea? Is it? Yeah, future senator. Future senator. There's the filibuster, and just an attempt to talk a bill to death. This, honestly, is the only point in the whole legislative process where the minority party can flex a little muscle, where they can do something. In order to end a filibuster, you need something called a vote of cloture, C-L-O-T-U-R-E, okay? If we change that, and yes, the rules were changed on that. Sometimes the media calls this, now they're exercising the nuclear option. Pretty drastic. It just means that you're taking the threshold for ending a filibuster from 60 down to 51 votes, which pretty much means the majority party now runs the show. Do look at the changes. Basically, filibusters now only apply to legislation. So you can't filibuster Supreme Court justices, their nominations, or executive nominations like cabinet members. You can't hold that back. Reconciliation, this is happening as we speak in Washington, D.C. It's a mechanism by which you can push a bill through the Senate without the threat of a filibuster. It's supposed to only really apply to a budget bill, but both political parties, the Republicans kind of started it, and the Democrats really have done more of it since the Republicans started it. They're going to use reconciliation, pretty sure, to ram through the economic stimulus bill and not let the Republicans slow it down. There we go. We voting. Conference committee. Keep that in mind because you hear so much about committees. Sometimes you lump this in with, is that a select committee, a joint committee, a standing committee? No, it's a conference committee. So think about a conference, groups of people getting together to confer. In this case, the House and Senate both passed a bill. They're not the same bill. So boom, a conference committee is going to go ahead and meet and discuss and hammer out one version of the bill. They'll go back and revote on that one version. And if the House and Senate pass that, we'll get it to the president. There are the president's options. Of course, that's some type of multiple choice or short answer question. I think you already know about vetoes. In order to override a veto, you need 2/3 of both the House and Senate. That's never going to happen. And so I shouldn't say never. Never say never. It's rarely going to happen. Okay. It happens about as often as I'm like sporting a summer tan. Okay. Let's call it rare. There we go. More veto stuff. Now, the importance of compromise. In all honesty, this only applies with divided government. The Democrats do not need to compromise right now. They just need to keep their members together. They don't need to compromise at all. I remember one of our recent presidents was, quote, negotiating with a minority party, and he basically looked him in the eye and said, elections have consequences, meaning, I don't really care what you're saying. I'm going to do what I want to do. And it's probably not the president you're thinking of either. All right, what do we have here? Basically, the American people consistently, when polled, have a very low regard for Congress, have a very high regard for their individual member of Congress. Go figure. And there's just all of that kind of awesomeness right there. Okay, so that's a quick review. That's Congress. I hope that's helpful. I'll crank one out also for the executive branch and the judicial branch. There we go. Go Saints.